My brother stole thousands from our family business, and when I exposed him, he turned everyone against me. Now my family thinks I'm the problem for wanting justice. I never thought I'd be at odds with my own family, especially not over something like this. We've always been close, or at least that's what I thought. Growing up, my brother Jake and I were inseparable. He's 2 years older than me, and even though we've had our share of sibling rivalry, I never imagined it would come to this. I'm 28 now, and Jake is 30, and together we've been working at our family's business since we were teenagers. Our parents built the business from the ground up, and it was always expected that Jake and I would one day take over. But that was before I found out Jake had been stealing from us. It all started about 6 months ago. I began noticing discrepancies in the accounts. Small things at first, missing invoices, payments that didn't add up. I handled most of the bookkeeping for the business, so I was the first to spot the inconsistencies. At first, I thought it was just a mistake. I figured I had misplaced something or entered something wrong. But the more I dug into the numbers, the more I realized that this wasn't a simple error. Money was disappearing, and I couldn't figure out where it was going. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the more I investigated, the more suspicious I became. I started going through old records, comparing transactions, trying to find a pattern. And that's when I noticed that the missing money always seemed to trace back to Jake's side of the business. He was in charge of sales and managing clients, and a lot of the missing funds were linked to deals he had been working on. At first, I didn't want to believe it. Jake and I had always been close, and the idea that he could be stealing from the family felt impossible. But the numbers didn't lie. Thousands of dollars were unaccounted for, and it all led back to Jake. I felt sick to my stomach. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him right away, but another part of me was scared of what I might find out. I didn't want to believe that my own brother could do something like this. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I couldn't ignore it. This was our family's livelihood at stake, and if Jake was stealing from the business, something had to be done. I decided to confront him one evening after work. I waited until everyone else had left the office, and then I approached him. "Jake, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked up at me, surprised. "What's up?" he asked casually, as if nothing was wrong. I took a deep breath. "I've been going through the books, and there's a lot of money missing. Thousands of dollars, and it all seems to lead back to you. What's going on?" Jake's face went pale, but he quickly recovered, putting on a defensive front. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, shaking his head. "You must have made a mistake." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "I didn't make a mistake, Jake. The numbers don't lie. You've been stealing from the business, haven't you?" His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might admit to it. But instead, he crossed his arms and said, "You're crazy. I'd never do something like that. You're just trying to cause trouble." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was lying to my face, and I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to demand that he tell me the truth. But I knew that wouldn't get us anywhere. "Jake, please," I said, my voice breaking. "Just tell me the truth. If you've been taking the money, we can fix this. But you have to be honest with me." He just shook his head again, refusing to admit to anything. I felt like I was hitting a brick wall. I didn't know what else to do, so I decided to go to our parents. I didn't want to involve them, but I felt like I had no choice. This wasn't just about me and Jake. It was about the business, about our family's future. I sat down with them one evening and laid everything out. I showed them the missing money, the discrepancies in the accounts, and explained how it all seemed to trace back to Jake. They were shocked, to say the least. My mum looked like she was about to cry, and my dad was furious. "We'll talk to him," my dad said, his voice tight with anger. "If what you're saying is true, there's going to be hell to pay." I felt a sense of relief, thinking that finally something was going to be done about this. But when my parents confronted Jake, everything took a turn for the worse. Instead of admitting to what he had done, Jake doubled down on his denial. He told them I was making it all up, that I was trying to sabotage him because I was jealous of his success. I couldn't believe it. Jake was turning the tables on me, making it seem like I was the one with the problem. And to my utter shock, My parents seemed to believe him. My dad, who had been so angry before, suddenly started questioning me. "Are you sure you've got your numbers right?" he asked. "Jake wouldn't do something like this. Maybe you've made a mistake." My mum looked at me with confusion and hurt in her eyes. "Why would you accuse your brother of something so awful?" I felt like I was losing my mind. I had the proof right in front of me, but somehow Jake had managed to twist the situation and make it seem like I was the one in the wrong. I tried to explain to my parents that I wasn't making this up, that I had the records to back it up, but they didn't want to hear it. "You two need to work this out," my dad said, clearly not wanting to deal with the situation anymore. "We can't have this kind of drama in the business. Your family, you should be able to trust each other." I left the house that night feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. My own family didn't believe me, and Jake had successfully turned them against me. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to walk away from the business altogether, but I couldn't. This was our family's livelihood, and I wasn't about to let Jake destroy it. I knew I had to keep fighting, even if it meant going against everyone I loved. The next day, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I gathered all the evidence I had, bank statements, invoices, transaction records, and I presented them to my parents again. "Look," I said, spreading the documents out on the kitchen table. "I'm not making this up. The money is missing, and it all leads back to Jake. I don't know how else to make you believe me." My dad frowned as he looked over the papers, but my mom seemed hesitant to even look at them. "I just don't understand why Jake would do something like this," she said softly, her voice filled with pain. "He's always been so responsible." I couldn't help but feel frustrated. "I don't know why either, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But the fact is he did. I'm not asking you to choose sides. I just want you to see the truth. We need to address this before it gets worse." But instead of taking action, my parents continued to drag their feet. They didn't want to believe that their son, my brother, could be capable of something like this. They kept making excuses for him, saying that maybe it was all a misunderstanding or that I was overreacting. I felt like I was banging my head against a wall, trying to make them see the truth, but they were too blinded by their love for Jake to face reality. Things only got worse from there. Jake, sensing that I wasn't going to back down, started spreading lies about me to the rest of the family. He told them that I was trying to ruin his reputation, that I was jealous of his success and wanted to take over the business for myself. And to my absolute horror, they believed him. Suddenly, I was the villain in my own family. My aunts and uncles started calling me, accusing me of trying to tear the family apart. Even my cousins, who I'd always been close with, started distancing themselves from me. It was like I was living in some kind of twisted nightmare. Jake had managed to turn everyone against me, and no one seemed to care about the truth. All they saw was the drama, the conflict, and they blamed me for it. I felt completely isolated, like I had no one to turn to. My parents wouldn't listen, my extended family had taken Jake's side, and even my closest friends were starting to question me. "Are you sure you're not blowing this out of proportion?" One of them asked me one night. "Maybe it's not as bad as you think." That question hit me like a punch to the gut. Was I blowing this out of proportion? Was I the one causing all the chaos in the family? I started to doubt myself, wondering if maybe I had misunderstood the situation, if maybe Jake wasn't as guilty as I thought. But every time I looked at the numbers, every time I saw the missing money and the transactions that pointed directly to him, I knew I wasn't wrong. Jake had stolen from the business, and I wasn't going to let him get away with it. As the weeks went by, the tension in the family continued to grow. My parents still refused to take any real action, and Jake continued to play the victim, painting me as the problem. I knew that if I wanted justice, I was going to have to take matters into my own hands. I started talking to a lawyer, asking about my options. If Jake wasn't going to admit to what he had done, maybe I could force him to. But the idea of taking legal action against my own brother made me feel sick. I didn't want to sue Jake. I didn't want to drag our family through an ugly legal battle. But at the same time, I couldn't just stand by and let him steal from us. This was our family's business, our livelihood, and he was putting it all at risk. I went back and forth for weeks, agonizing over what to do. Part of me wanted to let it go, to just walk away and let my family deal with the consequences. But another part of me knew that if I didn't do something, no one else would. Eventually, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Jake ruin everything we had worked for. I contacted the lawyer again and started the process of gathering more evidence. If my parents weren't going to take action, I would. I felt guilty, like I was betraying my family by going behind their backs. But I knew it was the only way. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. When my parents found out what I was doing, they were furious. "How could you do this?" my dad demanded one night, his face red with anger. "This is family, not some business transaction. You don't take your brother to court." My mom looked at me like I had broken her heart. "We raised you better than this," she said softly. "How can you turn against your own brother like this?" I tried to explain that I wasn't the one turning against the family, that Jake had done that when he started stealing. But they didn't want to hear it. All they saw was their family being torn apart, and they blamed me for it. I felt like I was drowning in guilt and frustration. No matter how much I tried to explain myself, no one was willing to listen. Jake had successfully painted himself as the victim, and I was the villain. The worst part was that I still loved my family. Despite everything that was happening, I didn't want to lose them. But it felt like they had already lost me. Every time I tried to reach out, every time I tried to explain what was really going on, they shut me down. "You need to let this go," my dad said one night after I tried to show him more evidence. "We're a family, and families stick together. You can't just destroy that over a few missing dollars." A few missing dollars. That's how they saw it. They didn't understand the scope of what Jake had done, how much money was actually missing, or how much damage he had caused. And I didn't know how to make them see it. I started to wonder if it was even worth it. Was I really going to go through with this legal battle, knowing that it would likely tear our family apart for good? Was justice really worth losing everyone I loved? But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered what was at stake. This wasn't just about money. It was about doing the right thing. Jake had betrayed our family, and he needed to be held accountable for it. If I didn't stand up and fight for what was right, who would? I had to believe that in the end, the truth would come out, and my family would understand why I had done what I did. The legal process was slow and painful. I had to gather even more evidence, meet with lawyers, and prepare for the possibility of going to court. My parents refused to talk to me during this time, and every interaction with Jake was tense and hostile. I felt like I was completely alone, fighting a battle that no one else wanted to be a part of. But I couldn't back down now. I had come too far to give up. As the court date approached, the tension in the family reached a boiling point. My parents begged me to drop the case, to find a way to resolve things without going to court. "You're going to tear this family apart," my dad said one night, his voice filled with desperation. "Is that really what you want?" My heart ached hearing those words, but I knew I couldn't back down. Jake had to be held accountable, no matter how much it hurt. The day of the court hearing was one of the hardest days of my life. Sitting in that courtroom, facing my own brother, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and guilt. I didn't want to be there. I didn't want any of this to be happening. But I knew I had to see it through. The evidence was presented, and the truth finally came out. Jake had been stealing from the business for months, just like I had suspected. The court ruled in my favor, and Jake was ordered to pay back the money he had stolen. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I just felt empty. Yes, I had gotten justice, but at what cost? My family was in shambles. My parents were heartbroken, Jake refused to speak to me, and I felt like I had lost everything that mattered to me. I had done the right thing, but it didn't feel like a victory. In the weeks that followed, things only got worse. My parents refused to forgive me for taking Jake to court. "You didn't have to do that," my mom said one night when I tried to talk to her. "You could have found another way. We're supposed to be a family, and you tore us apart." Her words cut me deeply, and for the first time, I started to question whether I had made the right choice. Jake, on the other hand, showed no remorse. Even after the court ruling, he acted like he was the victim, like I had somehow ruined his life. He refused to pay back the money and started looking for ways to dodge the court's orders. I couldn't believe it. Even after everything that had happened, he still refused to take responsibility for what he had done. It made me feel even more isolated, like I was the only one who cared about doing the right thing. I tried reaching out to my parents again, hoping that with time they would come around. But every time I called, they were distant, cold. It was like they didn't want anything to do with me anymore. I had never felt so alone in my life. I had done what I thought was right, but it had cost me everything. My family, my support system, it was all gone. As the months went by, I started to come to terms with what had happened. I had fought for justice, and while it had cost me dearly, I knew I had done the right thing. Jake had betrayed our family, and he had to be held accountable for it. I couldn't control how my parents or the rest of the family reacted, but I could control my own actions, and I had chosen to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. I still miss my family. There are days when I wish things could go back to the way they were before all of this happened, but I know that's not possible. Too much has changed, and the wounds run too deep. I don't know if my relationship with my parents or Jake will ever fully heal, but I have to live with the choices I made. I chose justice, and while it cost me everything, I know it was the right choice. In the end, I've come to realize that family isn't just about blood. It's about trust, loyalty, and doing what's right. Jake broke that trust, and my parents chose to look the other way. I couldn't do that. I had to stand up for what was right, even if it meant standing alone. It's been a painful journey, but I've learned a lot about myself and what I'm willing to fight for. I'm still working at the family business, though it doesn't feel the same anymore. Jake is no longer involved, and my parents have distanced themselves from the day-to-day operations. It's hard to run a business when your own family doesn't trust you, but I'm doing the best I can. I've hired new staff, brought in outside help, and I'm determined to keep the business going, no matter what. There are days when I wonder if I'll ever fully repair my relationship with my family. I've tried reaching out to them, but they're still hurt and angry. I don't know if they'll ever forgive me for what I did, but I have to live with that. I made a choice, and I have to accept the consequences. But I'm hopeful that one day they'll come to see that I wasn't trying to destroy the family, I was trying to save it. For now, all I can do is focus on the future. I've learned that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone. It's not easy, and it can be incredibly painful, but I don't regret the choice I made. Jake may have turned the family against me, but he couldn't take away my integrity. I did what I had to do, and I'm proud of that, even if it means walking this path alone. In the end, I know I made the right choice. I stood up for what was right, even when it meant going against my own family. It's been a long, painful journey, but I've come out stronger because of it. I don't know what the future holds for me and my family, but I'm hopeful that one day they'll understand why I did what I did. Until then, I'll keep moving forward, knowing that I fought for justice, even when it cost me everything.